if you're new here, welcome. If you're, regular attender with us, welcome back. We just basically teach you some things about the FedEx Ground space, the e-commerce space, a little bit of Amazon in there as well. Before we get started, I do have to read a quick disclaimer, as we do every week. So Route Consultant is not endorsed by, it is not recommended by Federal Express Corporation, FedEx Ground, or Amazon. Route Consultant is not sponsored by, it's not approved by, is not associated with, and has no connection whatsoever with Federal Express Corporation, FedEx Ground, or Amazon. All this means is that you will not hear any materially non-public information today, but hopefully you will hear some materially helpful information nonetheless. So we hope you enjoy the content today. And as always, we have an open Q&A session at the end for you to ask literally anything you have, you want to know about the space. There's our guest here today. I'll introduce him here in a second. But we have an open Q&A for the end. Usually the last 30 minutes or so is reserved for the questions that you guys have. But before you can ask a question, if you've been here before, you know how we do it. You have to answer one of our questions. So you can start loading your questions in at any time, but along with that, you need to answer the question for us. Who is your favorite teacher and why? This can be elementary school, kindergarten, it can be anybody up through your college, post-grad studies, whatever. Who is your favorite teacher and why? Let us know that. Type your question in and make sure to use the Q&A feature, not the chat feature, if you want us to see it. So we may not see it if it goes in chat, so make sure to use that Q&A button. So anyway, today I do have, my co-host will be Butch Butler. He is our executive sales director here at Route Consultants. Super excited to have this guy on today. Just a veteran of the space, a veteran at this company, just a wealth of knowledge for us. So I'm excited to bring him on here in a few minutes to share his some of his knowledge and experience with you. First thing we're going to do before that is I'm going to go through our newest listings on our inventory real quick. We've only got 2 today, but they are big ones, let me tell you. So first, we've got Northern Alabama. This is 13 line haul runs, valued at $3 million, about 85% revenue, about 20% EBITDA, 12 dedicated solo runs, and 1 unassigned solo run. It comes with 1 manager who covers 100% of the operational weight. So that's a lot of autonomy for you as the owner. It's really nice to have that. 11 spare tractors, so a lot of assurance there if something goes down. Business comes from a team of tenured contractors, dedicated runs off of guaranteed revenue, as you may or may not know. And this one may be eligible for SBA finance. So a good opportunity there out of Northern Alabama. Our other one, also the same region of the country, we've got Northern Mississippi, 15 line haul runs going for $7 million, okay? This is 7 dedicated team runs, 8 dedicated solo runs. This is 23% EBITDA, comes with 1 manager and 3 spare tractors. Remote ownership opportunity, high value fleet with newer vehicle models, which is really good to hear. Assumable truck debt option, and also may be eligible for SBA financing. So with that, that's our newest listing that we've got this week. With that, I'm going to go ahead and bring on Butch, if you want to come on here. Yeah. Hey, Butch. So, Butch, I'm excited, like I said, to bring you on to talk to you today about our content. So we're going to talk today just kind of a general overview, buying and selling in this space. Just what's the process look like? Who is this industry for? Kind of just give us your intro for people who may not be familiar with the space. And then we'll kind of lead into some content that may be more familiar to people who are already here.
Okay, well, thank you, Jesse. I appreciate that. That's a very kind intro. I've been fortunate enough to work with Spencer here at Route Consultants since almost the beginning. So I've been lucky enough to probably help more people in and out of this space than almost anybody out there. And so it's been so fun to do. And I joke around, I tell people I get to help people make their dreams come true. And it's true, helping people sell or buy a business is often a lifetime dream. So it's a fun role. I like doing it. And, we can talk in general about the process as you want to go through. To answer the question before we get started, I can go ahead and answer mine. It was my fourth grade teacher. Miss Davis was her name, and she was just a kind teacher and a young teacher. And it was really the first time in my young life as a boy that I had a crush on a teacher. And so that looking back, I recognize for the first time, that's when it happened, is in fourth grade with Miss Davis. So Miss Davis, if you're out there listening, now you know.
This is going on YouTube, so we'll make sure she sees it at some point. Awesome. Okay, Butch. Well, so first of all, let's just start with this. So, we do probably have some new people in here that may not be super familiar with the space. So what is, in general, we're looking at, a FedEx P&D operation, which is your pickup and delivery. These are your step vans that you see out on the road. Then you got your line haul, which is your tractors, and then Amazon DSP, which is kind of its own animal out there. So talk a little bit about maybe the risk profiles that each of these would entail, and someone like, how much should they expect to be involved? How much should they expect to risk capital-wise? Like what are the kind of the different profiles for these three?
Okay, so we'll start with the pickup and delivery side and line haul, and make that distinction and comparison first, because those are FedEx, and then we'll spend a minute or two on Amazon as well. And so I joke about it, and you guys have probably heard me say this, but the only real similarity in this business with P&D and line haul is they share a common customer. The businesses themselves are very different to operate and run. And so in terms of deciding what is best for you, I encourage everybody to look at their skill sets and their desire and knowledge of what they want to do in a business. Line haul businesses are very much functioning around staffing the business. And it's a higher level of attention in that you don't have as much turnover as often, but when you do, it's harder to go ahead and fill that seat, and it's expensive in line haul to have a seat that is not full. And so, when you're staffing a business for line haul, that is one of your bigger risks around running it. And that it's just a little more routine to staff a P&D business, because you're not looking for CDL drivers. You're looking for people who have some driving experience, but there's a larger pool of individuals to staff from in any given market. And so the first thing I tell people is, what type of a business do you want to run? Do you want to run a trucking and own a trucking company that does over-the-road trucking with CDL drivers? Or do you want to be in the neighborhoods doing last mile delivery, moving thousands of boxes on any given day? And so one has a lot of moving parts to it, and you're going to have hiccups, on a daily basis. The other one has a lot fewer moving parts. And when you have what's called a hiccup, it's not really a hiccup. It's a pretty big problem, because you've got a pretty big accident, something's broken down, or you've lost the driver. And that is just less common and more painful in line haul than it is in pickup and delivery.
Yeah.
And so from a risk profile perspective, you can ask yourself, which of these businesses sounds like something you would want to operate? I would say that from a remote ownership perspective and from a involvement perspective on a daily basis, you probably have a lot less of that in terms of daily involvement in a line haul business. And so on a pickup and delivery operation, you're going to be much more involved on a daily basis, because there are moving parts. And if you're not, then your BC is going to. And so as an AO, your role is to manage your customer, you manage your BC, and then you manage your vendors. And so you will have more of some of those frequency in a pickup and delivery business than you will in a line haul business. And either can be run remotely. I think we've demonstrated that either can definitely be run remotely. We'd like to see you a little bit closer to your pickup and delivery operation. If you need to be there, it's nice to be able to be a couple hours away from a plane, or a few hours, 4 or 5 hours in a car. But that's probably less necessary in line haul, because you just spend less time at the terminal. There's just less to do there. So you can run either remotely, but you can have greater distance remotely, I think, in line haul than you can really in P&D.
Gotcha. Okay. And now contrast that a little bit with Amazon. What's that look like as far as the investor part of it?
With regard to the investor conclusions and decisions with FedEx on the pickup and delivery side, you have the responsibility and obligation to a dedicated geography. You are responsible for all of the volume, pickup and delivery, that is in those dedicated zip codes. And that really doesn't change. It is your obligation to handle that volume on behalf of FedEx. For Amazon, that's not the case. For Amazon, you're going to have less geographic specificity. You can have your business flex up or down in size a little more easy than you do with FedEx. Amazon can tell you 1 week you're going to be running 20 different routes, and maybe a month later they're having you run 30. or even 40. So you have to adapt and change your business size and or location at times more frequently with Amazon than you do with FedEx. That just doesn't happen on the FedEx pickup and delivery side. And so the other thing, a distinction that's really important is Amazon is much less keen on remote ownership. They almost require you to not only be present in the terminal, but really have this be your main focus. They do not want owners that are involved really in 4 or 5 other businesses. They want people who are going to be dedicated to their Amazon business. And it's something they use to even disqualify candidates, is if you've got too many other irons in the fire, for lack of a better word, they will be less enthused to work with you.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And that kind of leads into my next question, which is what are the kind of things that FedEx versus Amazon are going to be looking for when it comes to deciding who is going to be an operator for me? Who am I going to deal with as a contractor or a DSP, right? So just kind of talk a little bit about that a little bit more in depth. What's FedEx looking for contrasted with what Amazon's looking for?
Okay, and so FedEx and Amazon are 2 companies that are attacking and approaching this space a little bit differently. Another joke I use is that FedEx is a logistics company trying to figure out its technology, and Amazon is a technology company trying to figure out logistics. And it's very appropriate in the way that they approach how they run their businesses and who they want to run their businesses. FedEx does not necessarily care if you are technology savvy or if you are present, and Amazon would much prefer that you have technology savvy and then you are present. And so in terms of which one might be the best fit for you, you can think about it that way. As I described, there's a lot more flexibility and variability in the Amazon space, where they can ask you to deliver in the south side of one city one day, and then 2 weeks later you're on the north side of the same city, and your drivers have to have that flexibility and you have to have the access to adapt your business. That just isn't the case with FedEx. And so it's a little bit easier from a stability perspective. In terms of what they're looking for, FedEx is really looking for entrepreneurs, and they don't necessarily care if you have other businesses. They don't necessarily care if you're in the terminal on a daily basis, whereas Amazon very much does.
Yeah, that makes sense. What kind of things are they going to want to see on your, balance sheets, tax returns, that kind of thing? When you get into this and you start to apply, for lack of a better word, when you start to inquire into these companies, these businesses, what is FedEx going to ask for you to get this ball rolling?
FedEx would really they're going to want to see a few things. I mean, the first thing, when you select a business that you're ultimately going to buy and you put that business under contract and you've come to a price and a purchase agreement is signed, at that point, then the seller of the business is going to make an introduction to the terminal manager at FedEx. And you're going to want to present them with what is called an RFI, a request for vendor information. It's really a business plan in which you're going to address your background, your sources of capital that you have available, your plan around how you're going to service the contract from a safety perspective, from a technology perspective, from a staffing perspective, from a fleet perspective. And so you're going to think about all of the vendor relationships that you're going to have, and you're going to talk in your RFI about how you're going to manage those relationships in your business and what type of a culture you're going to create in your business, most importantly around the safety culture. And so you're going to prepare a very extensive document for FedEx prior to ever meeting with them. You're going to send it to them, and then they're going to want to talk about how you're going to operate your business, your history and your background, if you have any in logistics and or business experience and management. And then, of course, they are going to want to know that you have access to capital to grow. This is an industry that is not only capital intensive, but it is high growth. And that's unique in our world today. Very few things are high growth that are also super capital intensive. So FedEx needs to make sure that you have access to capital to grow with them.
Understood. Okay. Now, again, with Amazon, are they looking for similar type? Yeah, obviously, they're more of an in the building, hands-on operator. So, in terms of their request for information, what are they looking for?
Well, they're not it doesn't necessarily have to have as much capital because you don't own your vans in Amazon. They own those. So you don't have as much capital tied up in the business. And as your business grows, you're not necessarily required to go out and buy new trucks. So they're less concerned about the balance sheet per se of the operator, and they're more concerned about the operator's experience. They really are looking for people with logistics experience. They're looking for people who are dedicated to this business and this business only, and who will commit themselves to it full time. Whereas from a FedEx perspective, you can think of committing 20 or 25 hours a week. And if you have the right infrastructure in place, you can run that business even less than 20 hours a week with the right infrastructure. That's not what Amazon expects when they sign up a new DSP. They expect you to be committed to that business and operating it much more closer to 40 or 50 or 60 hours a week.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. So, so this is something that I've sort of wondered a little bit too, because obviously my experience is more on the FedEx side. This is completely on the FedEx side. So what do you actually own? What is your asset, or for lack of a better word, what is your investment when you buy an Amazon route? Obviously you said with FedEx, you're getting zip codes or you're getting runs with line haul, but what do you actually own with Amazon?
You really own the right to service, to work for them. I mean, I don't know how else to say it, but you own the right and the access to their vans, the right to have their technology help you. But you do not have that dedicated contract. You do not own the trucks. So you own the right to service that a customer is really what it comes down to. Now, I will tell you, for the right to do that, the margins are very good. I've seen some Amazon businesses where the margins can be almost twice as much as FedEx EBITDA margins. And so that right is something that people pay for because you're going to produce cash flow pretty quickly. Now, in terms of valuation, we're not seeing the same valuation in Amazon businesses as we do in FedEx businesses, as from a multiple of cash flow, simply because you don't have that dedicated contract and you don't have the fleet to back it up. So from a cash flow multiple perspective, it's a little easier to enter the space, and you don't have that upfront capital to have to go out and buy a fleet, for instance.
Yeah, understood. Yeah. So right now, Butch, we're in the middle of peak season. All the carriers are just slammed, up to their eyeballs in volume. As an investor potentially looking to enter the space, what should I be looking at right now? I mean, are there blackout periods where I can't buy routes? There's nothing available. Like, when is a good time to get in? When should I be looking? Kind of walk me through the cycle of throughout the year of what this looks like from an outside investor's perspective.
Well, FedEx really would prefer that very little activity in terms of routes changing hands, especially on the P&D side, occur anytime after November 1st. Now, we have helped people in and out of the space, and FedEx will approve these transactions when it makes sense for them. And so if they've got a failing contractor, if they need someone approved for a reason that benefits them, they will do that. But it's not an ideal time for a new investor to enter the space. As a matter of fact, a new investor in an ideal world would be operating by June. As in a perfect world, you'd be operating by March or April because you have a few months to learn the business, maybe make any tweaks and changes to the business as you want to improve it. Because by August and September, you are going to be doing peak planning. You're going to be strategically positioning yourself with your vendors to have access to what you need to operate in peak. And so whether that's if you have a recruiting vendor, or whether if you have a rental truck vendor or new trucks, you're going to be positioning yourself for peak as early as August. And by October, you are in full swing peak training. And so the goal from a cycle perspective, I would like to see new investors transition into the business in the first 6 months of the year so they can be prepared for a very good, successful peak in the back half of the year.
And in terms of the runway between when you meet with the terminal manager for the first time and when you can expect to close, what's a typical amount of time we usually see there?
It does vary by terminal and the experience level. Some terminals just haven't had a lot of turnover, so it may be the first time their terminal manager is dealing with this, right? So it can be as long as 8 to 12 weeks. I've seen them do it in a lot less. If FedEx wants to do something, they will do it as quickly as they need to, I promise. But it's rare that it happens in less than 4 to 6 weeks. That's really quick. And so think 6 to 12 weeks from the time you engage in the process of your AIM meeting.
Gotcha. Okay. Final thing I want to get to with you, Butch, is talk a little bit, if you could, on the P&D side about, and the line haul side too, a little bit about scale guidelines, what's minimum and kind of what to expect in terms of, maybe explain scale guidelines a little bit and tell people what they should think about when it comes to that.
Okay. And so scale is a big issue with FedEx and has been over the last few years as they've tried to prepare their terminals to have contractors who are prepared for growth. They've wanted to make sure that people have not been too big, knowing that we're going to see periods of e-commerce growth that are pretty pretty significant. So in terms of any given building, FedEx generally for a terminal on the pickup and delivery side would like to see no contractor be bigger than 15% of a given terminal, and that's on the large side. Some terminals that are very large, they want you to be less than 5%. And so it varies based on the size of the terminal. And really that is what it comes down to. So think 5 to 15% of a given terminal is a good scale guideline on P&D. And they're pretty strict on maintaining that. If you get to be above that from a scale perspective, you will find yourself on their radar screen. And then they're going to pay a little bit more attention to your KPIs around delivery, around pickups, around safety. And it's just, the bigger you get, the more important your operation is for them to monitor and to make sure is within compliance. So sticking within scale guidelines keeps you out of their focus as well, too, in some respects. On the line haul side, scale is determined a little bit differently. It's not determined by terminal, it's determined by district. And there are 26 districts in FedEx in the country, and you can currently be or have up to 15 runs in any given corporation in any given district. There is some discussion about that increasing, and I've heard that it could happen at any time. FedEx has historically been less strict around scale on line haul. They sometimes will let businesses get a little bit above that 15 level, and they will sometimes let operators create second entities in a district. And so they will let people grow that way. And so it really depends on how well you operate and what level of service you provide to FedEx as to how well they're going to let you grow and scale on the line haul side.
Great. Got it. Butch, we've got some really good questions coming in here. I'll go ahead and answer give my answer to the teacher question. So this would be my college history teacher, Dr. Richard Good at Lipscomb University. And he was just, history, you got to learn dates and names, right? Well, this was a guy who, in the midst of teaching you the dates and the names, he would teach you, okay, what was the hot button issue of this person's time? And he would have you basically take the two opposing sides, and you would have to pick a side and write an essay about it. And obviously in the process, you learn the dates and the names and the key players along with that. But he would take really hot button issues and just have you write along, think in terms of broader themes as you're thinking about the dates and the names. So that's just always stuck with me. Just an incredibly dynamic teacher, and just one of the best classes I've ever taken was him. So, okay. Questions, here we go. We got Tom Gold is first up today, Butch. He says, Mr. Alton was his teacher, great guy. He says, what price range should I look at with $500,000 cash to invest? I have no experience in the space. I live in Canada, and I noticed the returns are not good given the limited size of the market. How safe and reliable is the EBITDA as it relates to relying on the income to borrow capital, et cetera? How much loan to value for SBA loans and their criteria? A lot of stuff there, Butch. Is there anywhere you want to start?
Yes, thank you very much. And I would say $500,000 is plenty of capital to get into this space. And actually, I like to see new investors into the space have a nice capital cushion. $75,000, $100,000 is a pretty minimal kind of a number. So if you were working with five, I would say you may want to put 350 to 400, maybe around 350 to work from an equity perspective. That would allow you to buy quite a large business. The SBA is still active in this space. We have lenders that are active currently. And so you may not want to put 90% leverage on a business now, given where interest rates are. So say you want to put, maybe 20 or 30% down, and you get a little bit of seller financing. That would allow you to have the kind of returns you would need to service that debt. And I would say in that structure, if you could put down 20 or so percent capital into a deal, that would be plenty of capital to do from an SBA perspective. Most sellers are conditioned to offer a little bit of seller financing too. And so you would have plenty of capital to get into the space. In terms of what size business you could buy, I mean, you could buy a rather large pickup and delivery business with a few $100,000 down. If that was 20%, you can do the math, but you're buying a business north of $1.5 million in revenue. And from a scale perspective, it's hard to find a pickup and delivery business that is much larger than that anyway. And so it's right in the sweet spot with regard to how much capital you have and the size of the businesses that are available. In terms of the reliability of EBITDA margins, I would say it's obvious we've seen some erosion of those margins over years, but I will tell you that we've seen this pendulum effect go back and forth before, and FedEx will at some point need to pay their contractors a little bit better rates, and we'll see margins go back up. And I fully anticipate that'll happen in the next 12 months, and we're even hearing rumblings that it could happen sooner. And so the predictability of these businesses is real. The growth is real, and how you manage your business allows you to generate the EBITDA margins. I see some operators that are very happy running their businesses with an operating margin of 10 or 11 or 12%. And they're just willing to carry a little extra payroll. And because they don't want to have issues around service. They don't want to have issues around working their drivers to the point that they create turnover. And so having a little bit extra payroll, you may give up a little bit on the margin side, but it allows you to service your customer, and it allows you to sleep well at night as you run your business. And I know other people who say, look, I don't want to run heavy on payroll. I'll go ahead and put together a deep contingency plan and maybe even be willing to step in the truck myself if I need to run my business closer to a 20% margin. And so really how you generate the infrastructure in your business will determine what your margins can look like. But 10 to 20% is a very real and achievable number depending upon what infrastructure you put in place. And that's on pickup and delivery.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah. And so with him being Canadian, Butch, he's asking his other question here is any suggestions for SBA loans for a Canadian? I mean, is there anything special to think about when it's an international buyer?
Well, I don't think our government would back the paper, so I don't know if there is an equivalent in Canada. I don't know that. That's a good question. We can look into it.
Okay, yeah, Tom. We'll get you an answer on that. If you want to shoot us an email, Danielle, if you can put that in the chat for Tom, we'll get you an answer on that, Tom. Good questions there. And I will say real quick, Butch, just to kind of dovetail with what you were saying, the margin that you can potentially absorb a little bit of into your payroll. The average lifespan of a P&D driver right now is about 3 to 6 months. High turnover that we're seeing sometimes in this space. So what we do see is that contractors who are able to sort of buy a little bit of extra loyalty, for lack of a better word, or buy-in from their drivers with some extra payroll going towards the drivers, they have a lot higher chance of succeeding and having less safety issues, for example. Better service, better safety. You just get that the longer that they're in the truck beyond that 6-month mark. So I can just speak from experience on that. When you get a veteran team in there, that is something that can really pay dividends over the long run, especially from the safety perspective. So I just, again, if that's something you want to be able to do and take a little hit on the margin, that is something I would certainly recommend from the operator perspective. Okay. All right. Nick Conlon, he's got 3 questions here for you, Butch. So his first is, his teacher crush, Senorita Underwood from 12th grade. Okay. His best actual teacher was Captain Matt Riley, USMC. He was his first professional boss and mentor. Awesome. And his questions, Butch, are first, and we'll just take these one at a time. Amount of additional capital. How much additional capital do I need access to in a typical month for line haul?
Well, in terms of additional capital in any given month, I'm going to rephrase this and say we like you to have a capital cushion equal to at least 6 months of whatever your debt service is, and or that $75,000 to $100,000. That's kind of a minimal level. In line haul, it's going to depend on a couple of things. One, what is your fleet strategy? Do you own your trucks or do you lease your trucks? Because if you own your trucks, you're going to want to have a little more capital put aside because it's a lumpy business. When something breaks on an 18-wheeler, it's an expensive part no matter what it is. And so you're going to want to have access to extra capital if you own your trucks. That's for sure on the line haul side. So I would think a couple $100,000 if in fact your strategy is that you may need to buy a truck at any given point. Now you can always finance the trucks, but you're going to be making a significant down payment on it. And so, yeah, a couple $100,000 is plenty on the line haul side, but it's 75 to 100 on the pickup and delivery side is plenty. And again, 6 months debt service is the way I like to think about that capital cushion.
The second question here, Butch, maybe just a general overview for us, if you could. SBA eligible businesses, what's required for something to be SBA eligible?
Okay. And so you would need the seller to be selling their entire business to you, not in its entirety. So not a portion of their business, not just a couple of the line haul runs or not just a few of their zip codes on the P&D side. You would need to be selling the entire business. And what that gives you is tax returns and P&Ls, because no one keeps P&Ls for just a portion of their business, really. No one operates their business and keeps a P&L by zip code, for instance. That's people cross over zip codes. That's just the way it works. So if you're buying a full business, you're going to have access to tax returns and P&Ls for the entire business, and you would need multiple years. The SBA really needs 1 full year and then a stub year by the definition of it. But most banks are going to want to see at least 2 years and oftentimes 3 years. I will make the caveat that data that you're going to provide the banks is not going to be entirely useful for you in evaluating the business you're buying, but it is going to be necessary for the bank to check a box for the SBA to go ahead and proceed with financing through the SBA. And so tax returns, P&Ls, fleet information, a copy of the contract. Those are the basic requirements that you're going to see from the SBA. And I would encourage you, if you're going to do this, to operate with a bank that knows what they're doing in the space, because you could spend a lot of time trying to educate a banker only to get to know, because the length of the FedEx contract is generally 1 year. For banks that are not comfortable with this space, that is oftentimes a no once you get to underwriting. So select a bank that has done FedEx deals, so their underwriters are familiar with the terms and conditions and renewal of the contract, and then you'll be in shape to get it done. But make sure you're working with somebody, and we can recommend them, but make sure you're working with somebody who knows what they're doing in the space.
Butch, this is kind of for my own knowledge here. This is something I've wondered about myself. Let's say maybe for our current contractors in here that may be looking to sell down the road. They got a business right now in a high growth residential area. They see just rapid growth in the neighborhoods all being built up, and they're getting more and more stop density. Let's say that they did want to segment off their routes by zip code, and they wanted to keep specific financials by zip code. Is that something that could potentially make something go SBA, or does that not even matter at all?
Well, I mean, we do take businesses and break them up, okay? And you can carve up a business, and we have had SBA banks use those P&Ls, and there are oftentimes instances where you can do that math and get pretty close, okay? And if you can, then you can present that to the banks, and we've had banks that have done that. Now, it's gotten more and more difficult, and we had to educate a lot of banks to get them comfortable with the process of how we broke up the business. But yes, you can actually do that for the SBA, and we can do it. Now, in terms of operating your business, Jesse, I think it would be operationally constraining if you had to think about keeping drivers in zip codes.
Yeah.
And so it would be, it's let us do the math on the back end and run your business efficiently is what my advice would be. If you were to go ahead and proactively break the business into actual different businesses, you would need to find new AOs in that terminal, because you can only have one authorized officer. You can only be the authorized officer of one business in any given terminal, getting back to scale. So if you broke your business proactively and started keeping it and running it separately, you would need to find a new AO for part of the business.
Right. Yeah. Well said. Okay. His third question is negotiations process with FedEx prior to closing. What are the risks here, and what can or likely will happen?
Okay, and so this is very different if you're buying an entire business versus a piece of a business. If you're buying the entire business, depending upon the contract renewal date of the business that you're buying, you might inherit the existing contract. You might just come in and say, I'm going to buy this business, and it's a 2-year contract, and I'm 3 months into it. And so we're going to stand up and take over the existing contract. If that's the case, you know exactly on the front end what you're getting, and you're not going to go through a negotiation process. If you're buying a piece of a business, you will always go through a process, because FedEx is going to, once you're approved through the AIM meeting, FedEx then needs to create two new contracts, one for the remaining portion of the business the seller is going to keep, and one for the portion of the business that the buyer is purchasing. And so in that process, FedEx creates two new contracts, and you have the opportunity to negotiate with FedEx. They will present you with what they think is their first initial contract terms and conditions, and then you will have an opportunity to negotiate with them in that process. And if you do not come to an agreement with them, of course, there's no obligation for you to continue with the purchase, because you've yet to reach, you can't reach a contract terms with them.
And just real briefly, Butch, why would, and I know the answer to this just for the benefit of people here. So why would FedEx want to go in and give you a different contract? I mean, if two pieces of the same business are coming off of the same business, why would they want to give you a different contract for part of it versus the part that's existing with that remaining contract?
Yes, because, and the most glaring part is the number of miles and the rural nature of a contract. We oftentimes will look at a business that has a contract that was created where half of the business is urban stops and the other half is much more rural. And so if you're going to break that business, a logical way to do it is to keep the urban stuff together and to put the more dense stuff in one piece with the less dense rural stuff on another. And then FedEx is really going to be looking at two different businesses, and you don't get the blended benefit of having some of your dense stops get a little bit higher pay rate because you're also running a really rural portion of a territory too. So when you're going to break up something geographically, that will require FedEx's engineering department to look at this as, hey, look, what is the component of the new CSA relative to the components of the combined previous CSA? Yep,
exactly. And then his final part here is, how do you grow the business? So it looks like he's talking about line haul, only buying new lines from existing operators or new lines created by FedEx. How do you grow line haul?
Okay, in terms of growing a line haul, you need to get into the business, and generally you're going to buy a business that has a couple of line haul runs. You need to have at least two to be a contractor, so you can't really start with just one. So you buy a business that has a couple of line haul runs, and in terms of growing it, you can grow it a couple of different ways. You can acquire runs from people in the terminal. There's plenty of opportunities, not even through public brokers like ourselves, but lots of these businesses trade privately. Runs are sold from contractor to contractor privately all of the time. So you can grow by buying runs. You can also grow by what's called doing work on the unassigned board. And you're basically going to let FedEx know at the terminal level that you have access to a driver and a truck, and you're going to provide power for them to move freight. And if there is enough opportunity on the unassigned board, they will allow you to do that. And the unassigned board is a rotation. These are runs that do not necessarily go every single night. And so there is a rotation for that work, and the contractors in the terminal that have agreed to provide that power on the unassigned board, they go through literally a rotation. Contractor A is offered the opportunity to move that freight. If they don't want to do it, contractor B is offered it, then contractor C, and you don't go back to the top of the line. If you reject it, you keep going through the whole rotation, and then eventually someone moves that freight, and that's called doing work on the unassigned board. You generate tractor points by moving that. You get paid just like it was dedicated work. And then if FedEx decides at any point to go ahead and make one of those unassigned runs a dedicated run, you have the opportunity to bid on it and grow your business that way. And so it really starts with, is there work on the unassigned board? Can I find a driver and a truck? And will FedEx allow me to move freight in the unassigned board based on what's going on in their terminal? And you can grow that way up to 15 runs in any given district, and or you can set up additional corporations in other districts and do the same thing to continue to grow.
Right. Jeff Height, he says, favorite teacher, Mr. Campanaro, made learning fun and interesting. That's what it's all about. His question, Butch, is if you assume truck debt, do you typically just subtract that amount from the purchase price?
It is a component of the purchase price. So let's say that we have a business that is selling for $1 million. That's the purchase price. The components of the capital into that deal, some of it can be truck debt that is being assumed. And in this, for hypothetical instance, if you were going to assume $300,000 of truck debt, then what wouldn't be necessary is to find another $700,000 of capital to go into the deal. And that can consist of capital from the buyer and or some seller financing. But oftentimes, if you're going to be assuming truck debt, there's not going to be another bank involved. The bank that is involved is providing the debt on the vehicles and the trucks. So the other components of that capital structure would be equity from the buyer and some seller financing to go along with that truck debt.
Got it. Ed Burke says, high school speech teacher taught me how to be comfortable with public speaking. This is a big one, Butch. I don't know. We may want to punt on this one, but can you speak to the day or week in the life of a P&D and line haul owner?
Yes, I can. And but I'm going to tell you, it is all over the board. So, yep. There are some people who are actively involved in their business on a daily basis. They go to the terminal. They like that. They like to see and be close to their drivers and their business and their trucks. And this is how they spend their time. And it's what they want to do. So there are some people who may spend 30, hours a week in the terminal. Now, Jesse, as you know, there's not a lot that goes on in the terminal after 10 o'clock in the morning. The trucks are dispatched and it's a little bit quiet in the afternoon until people come back. But there are definitely contractors who spend, time in the terminal 20, 30 hours a week, even though it's, most of that work is between, call it 6 or 7 and 10 in the morning. Then there are other people who would like to go to the terminal on a quarterly basis to do their business development review. And that's pretty much it. Right. And so, and anywhere in between on the P&D side, but think, realistically, if you have people helping you in the business, I like to say 20 to 25 hours a week, you can run one of these businesses and dedicate that amount of time to it and not put yourself in a position where your hair is on fire. On the line haul side, it's frankly a little bit different. Some people on the line haul side hardly ever, if ever, go to the terminal. And they may spend as few as 15 to 20 hours or even as few as 10 hours a week, especially if they have a full-time recruiter. If you have a full-time recruiter and you've got a line haul business that is large enough to have a BC to help you with dispatch and safety training and those things, what you're really doing is you're managing your BC, you're managing your customer, and you're managing your vendor relationships that your BC doesn't manage. So you can spend less than 10 hours a week on the line haul side. Now, if something really goes wrong, there are going to be weeks that you're spending more than that, but there are going to be weeks you can spend less too and just do the administrative side of the business.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll just add to that having a manager who has bought in to your vision and your profit goals and everything you want to execute in your business is absolutely critical, particularly on the P&D side, as they will be daily monitoring your efficiency of your routes. They'll be determining the number of trucks that you send out on a daily basis, scheduling your drivers. I mean, you cannot overstate the importance of having a manager who has bought into your whatever level of profit you want to impose on your business. That manager has to see it the same way. And so I just really encourage you when you get into it, if you get in on the P&D side, you need to have a good relationship with that manager to make sure they are absolutely on board with you. And
you're going to communicate with them on a daily basis, probably, sure. Right, Jesse? Yes. I mean, that's just the reality on the P&D side. You're going to communicate, if not every day, then almost.
Absolutely. And also, I mean, there's going to be times when sometimes, if there's a serious accident, you need to know right away. And God forbid if let's say the terminal manager hears about something first, you don't ever want to be surprised by something in your business, right? So you want your BC calling you first versus the terminal on literally anything, right? So having that, that very close relationship with the managers is just critical. All right, got a couple more here, Butch. It's been a busy one on the Q&A side.
Good.
So Michael Madden, he says, Sister Margie in high school taught me how to understand math in a way that other teachers couldn't. I assure you, no crush on this one. Love it, Michael. Okay. His question, is it possible to get into the Amazon line haul without purchasing the runs from a current contractor?
I believe that it is. Hey, Mike, how you doing? You and I have spoken before, so it's good to talk with you again. And yes, I believe that it is. It's not something that I have a lot of expertise in. The difference on the Amazon line haul is you're going to have your own DOT number. And so it is a little bit different. You do own trucks, I believe, on that side of the business as well, too. So it's different than their pickup and delivery side.
Well, that reminds me, Butch, you want to talk a little bit about what we do get as FedEx contractors getting to use FedEx's DOT number and what that means for sort of the value of the business from a risk, a liability perspective.
It's huge. I mean, FedEx carries that umbrella policy for all contractors, both line haul and pickup and delivery. And it really does protect the contractor network from those disasters. I mean, you're responsible for having insurance for your truck and your driver, but FedEx is going to cover the vast majority of the damage that you do to other people's property. And now, of course, there are incentives that are, I call them safety incentives, but they're really penalties that you do have to, a little bit of fines and penalties when you have accidents, but you do have an umbrella coverage, and it's not under your own DOT number, it's under FedEx's DOT number. And so that is a very meaningful component to protecting the business.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, last question I'm seeing, and if anyone else has a question, go ahead and get it in. This will be the last one we have, unless we have more questions afterwards. So go ahead and type those in if you got them. If not, we may try to wrap up right after this, Butch, but we're going to get Dustin's question in here. Dustin Hood, he says, hi, looking at buying 8 routes in Texas. Seller has 9 trucks. He owns 5 of them, but the other 4 are rentals. So for someone new stepping in, would you suggest me keeping the 4 rentals, or should I buy 4 trucks and get rid of the rentals?
We rarely recommend renting trucks as a long-term strategy. So I would say if you're going to buy that business, be prepared to put capital to work, buy some new trucks, and buy a spare or 2 as well, because it's always good from a fleet management perspective to be able to handle your maintenance on a scheduled basis and have spares that you can put in and out of service. So yeah, I would say go ahead and replace those rentals with new trucks and buy yourself an extra 1 or 2 so you have a little contingency in your business.
And I can say from being a driver for 12 years myself, Butch, if I get a brand new truck, it is going to seriously increase my my loyalty and my buy-in to that contractor, because that's a great way to show that you care and you invest in your drivers, is getting them a new ride, because that is essentially their office that they are in and day out. So
new trucks are good for everybody in the business. I mean, yes, except your mechanic. Sorry about that. but realistically, they make your business run more efficiently, more smoothly. You're doing everything scheduled as opposed to ad hoc breakdowns. Your drivers love it. Your customers love it. And so everybody loves it except your repairman.
Yeah. Well, Butch, that's all we got. I really appreciate your wisdom and experience here. We are going to wrap it up for today. You got about another 15, 20 seconds, people, if you want to get a question in, but otherwise we're going to call it. Everybody, I hope you have a great Christmas, happy holidays. Be safe out there, and we will see you next week. Oh, we got one more coming in from Mick. Okay. Right in under the bar here. All right. So last thing, Mick says, is owning a depreciation strategy or something else?
No, it's not necessarily a depreciation strategy. You get the benefit of the depreciation, but owning your trucks, I think of it as a margin strategy, because if you're leasing, you're throwing money away paying for trucks, unless you're doing something that is a full service lease, like through our Hello Truck lease program. And you can make an argument there that there is a complete margin trade-off. But if you're just leasing trucks and then you're going ahead and doing the repair and maintenance and things yourself, you're going to be trading away margin. So if you're going to do lease, make sure you do a full service lease program like Hello Truck Lease.
Yep, love it. All right, everybody. Thank you for being here. We will see you hopefully next week. Happy holidays, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Happy holidays.